Hey guys, it's Mr. Wolfe here, and I'm going to be going over constructing data tables. And so I know, you guys have worked with data and data tables plenty of times in your science classes in the past. But throughout this year, you guys are going to be planning investigations and building data tables from scratch, without a template like this, just from scratch. And so it's important to at least, review this and go over the main components when you guys are going to be doing these investigations. So not only is it important for review, but as a high school accelerated biology class, the data you guys are going to be working with in this class throughout the year is going to be a little bit more complex. And so with this complex data, there isn't always a one-size-fits-all data table. Right? So like this template right here won't always work for the experiment you're doing. And so you need to be able to go through the thinking process of, what's the best way to organize my data. So let's start. So first of all, why are we going to construct data tables? Well, it's a neat and logical way to organize data from an experiment. And once we've built a data table, once we have it all set up, data collection is just made so much easier. So it makes data collection easier. All right, and so before we go to this template right here, the most important thing you could get out of this video is in this box right here. Because sometimes you're going to have to make your data table different from the one below. You always want to be thinking when approaching the construction of your data table, how can I best organize my data? And then once you have this mindset right here, just kind of going through this checklist and making sure that you have everything you need and just a way to help you organize your thinking. All right, and so here's this checklist, and we're going to go through it with looking at this table. So first we're going to start with number 4 with this table, with the title, because the title is already given to us, sort of. The effect of variable you are changing on the variable you are measuring. So the effect of the variable we are changing is our independent variable, and then on the variable you're measuring, that is our dependent variable. Right? And for the purposes of this table, let's come up with an experiment. The effect of MSG, this is a chemical in food, I know it's in Chex Mix, on, let's say, mouse weight. So there's our title. We're going to start now with, and we just identified our independent and dependent variable. So let's start by organizing our table in a series of columns. And obviously we have kind of like a pre-made template table here, but that's not always going to be the case. And so it's helpful to start with your independent variable on the left. You could look at your table, see the independent variable, the different conditions, and say, okay, how did each condition differ? For our specific example, our independent variable in this case would be, you wouldn't really put MSG, we're going to put diet. And so the reason we're putting diet here is because we're not always going to give these mice MSG. We're going to have a control variable, control, and then we're also going to have our independent variable. So we could say diet with 0.001 milliliters of MSG. So right here, this goes back to number 3 of stating our specific variables along with our units, milliliters right here. And so let's go back to focusing on our columns. And we're going to skip this column right here for now. So let's go to this one. And we're going to put our dependent variable here. And in this case, our specific variable is going to be mouse weight. We also want to include the units, so pounds. Right? So again, our dependent variable is, this is what we're measuring. So with any good science experiment, we're not just going to test one mouse. We need to test multiple mice in order to have the most accurate data as possible. And so here we're going to put trials. And then each trial could correspond to a different mouse. So you need at least 3 trials for a good experiment but a lot of times you want more. All right, so here we have a data table. And we go back to this question, it's making a good amount of sense. You know, we could see our diet, and then if we just look at this part right here, we could say, all right, with all these trials, this is what we got. But we have a lot of trials, and sometimes it might be tough to make sense of all of these numbers here. So what we could do is we could just look at the average of each group. So we could say deep average dependent variable here. And then specifically, again, always labeling our column with the specific variable average. And I'm not going to repeat this part right here, but essentially you would just write the same thing. Mouse weight, again with units pounds. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking every number we get right here, and we're taking the average in this column. And this will give us a better picture of the effect of MSG on mouse weight. So this is a good example of a data table right here. But depending on your experiment and your data, this isn't always going to work. So for instance, let's say we have a similar but different experiment right here. And again, we're going to start with the title in this case, the effect of MSG on mouse weight over time. So let's start with identifying our independent and dependent variables. Again, our independent variable is going to be MSG, our mouse weight is going to be our dependent variable, but now we have a new kind of variable in our problem, which is time, right here. And we need to be able to include this in the data table and have it make sense. And it's going to be tough to incorporate time in this data table right here. So let's think about how we could just construct a data table from scratch. And again, we always just want to have in mind is what's the best way to make sense of this data. So if I look at this title right here, if I want to understand the effect of MSG on mouse weight over time, I want to know what's going on each day essentially. So I'm going to build my data table, and I'm going to put time, instead of the independent variable being all the way to the left, I'm going to put time in this case. And I still want it to be I still want my units, so that's going to be days. And I'm just going to make like 3 rows here. 2, 3. So this is good. I have time, and now I can reference the rest of my data, but I have a problem now is where do I put my independent variable, right? Because the independent variable was on the left column previously. Well, I'm actually going to skip the independent variable for now because I know that if I'm looking at a data table and I'm trying to make sense of it, I could say, all right, on this day, we have a measurement here. And if we have a measurement, that's our dependent variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make like this all-encompassing column here. And again, this is going back to number 2 is start with organizing your columns. I'm going to make an all-encompassing column called mouse weight. And again, specifying my variables and units. All right, so now I can say, all right, on this day, the mouse was this weight. But I still need to be able to differentiate between our independent variable and our control group. So what I could do is I could draw a line right down the middle here and have my independent variable right here. And I could say control group, and then I could say my diet with 0.001 milliliters of MSG. So here I have my independent variables here. The dependent variable is kind of all-encompassing above, and I still have my time as well. So we have a good data table right here, and we could still go a little bit further. We could still incorporate our trials and our averages in here, and that's why I left this space here. So, for instance, if I just draw some lines here, this could be trial 1, 2, 3, and the average. This still stays within the bounds of our column for our independent variable right here. We could do the same for the other experimental group, or the experimental group. So every number in here is going to be under the column of our dependent variable. We know it's going to be weight. And we could specify these, we could shorten or specify these columns to focus on the control group or the experimental group. And then finally, we also have our reference for time. Each day, what was going on here. So these are two good examples of data tables. And you guys can go back throughout the year and reference this template or this template in terms of building your data tables, but sometimes even these two won't work. So just go through the same type of thinking that we went through here. Make sure to just ask yourself this question, how can I best organize my data? Use the checklist to go through and help you through that process. And that is it for constructing data tables.